I got a call from a customer that had requested help upgrading their computers to Windows 11. So they had 3 Windows 10 era desktops, and to be completely safe and compliant in the world of Microsoft's planned obsolescence and making sure that everybody that's on Windows 10 feels like they are no longer secure and safe because they're no longer updating it, I said, sure, I'll help you get on Windows 11. This was a project because they had 3 computers. The first one was a laptop with a spinning disk running Windows 10. The second one was a desktop with a spinning disk running Windows 10. And the third was another desktop that actually had a solid-state hard drive. In every case of these computers, these are computers that Microsoft has deemed unable to run Windows 11 because the processor is supposedly too old, even though the instruction sets that Windows 11 uses are fully compatible with these CPUs. But Microsoft would probably rather these computers go to the landfill and you buy new computers. But I said, I'll help you upgrade because I know some tricks up my sleeve that can help you get on Windows 11 with the computers that you have, and you might only need a solid-state hard drive. So the latest iteration of Windows 11 is 25H2, and 25H2 has been known for Microsoft to have worked around the workarounds. In other words, they have made it very difficult to do in-place upgrades on computers that supposedly don't meet Windows 11's requirements. In the past, you could modify some registry entries like most setup, lab config. If you know what I'm talking about, those are ways that you can bypass certain checks for processors and TPM 2.0 in the registry. But these workarounds seem to fail on Windows 25H2. However, these were perfectly capable computers of running 25H2, the latest iteration of Windows 11, and so I proceeded with doing the upgrades. Now, I know that you can do clean installs of Windows 11, but when a customer has a computer that's set up a certain way, they have their browser set up a certain way, they have their email already configured, they have programs that they want, they've got data in certain places, and I don't understand the full layout of the computer, I always prefer doing an in-place upgrade rather than a clean install, because with a clean install, you have to start from scratch, and invariably the customer is losing something, they're missing something, they don't know where something is, things look different, and they're calling me saying, I could find it before you worked on my computer. So for that reason, if I can do an in-place upgrade, I do, because it's actually a pretty smooth process once you understand how to get around the blocks and the checks for unsupported CPUs. There are multiple people that have worked on scripts that can bypass these checks and have put these scripts into commands on the internet that you can look for and you can research. There's an upgrade path that launches the Windows 11 setup as a server install, and that server install fully allows you to use an in-place upgrade, and it will keep the version of Windows that you have, whether it's Windows 10 Home or Windows 10 Pro, and it will keep that version of Windows 11 when you upgrade, and it's very seamless. Rather than running commands that I found on the internet, I collected the commands that I found on GitHub, and I put them in ChatGPT to analyze and look to see what they were doing. ChatGPT gave me another command that I could use that was safe and would launch the Windows 11 setup in a way that would push the server install and would bypass all of the checks, which was really, really cool, and I was able to use it on these computers. I will link the full text of the batch file that it generated so you can look at it for yourself, but I was able to successfully do an in-place upgrade with the Windows 11 ISO for 25H2 on these computers, and it didn't prompt for any kind of checks for CPUs or TPM 2.0. We also learned, and I was reminded the hard way, that you don't ever upgrade to Windows 11 on a spinning disk. You will regret it. And the experience was literally terrible. And I told the customer, there's no way that this is going to work. We need to upgrade you to a solid state hard drive. And they agreed. And thankfully, a SATA solid state hard drive runs miles better than a spinning disk running Windows 11. So the laptop and the desktop both got upgrades to a solid state hard drive. Even though it's the SATA hard drive, it runs fine on Windows 11. We were able to get everything cloned over to their new system. When you clone a spinning disk hard drive to a solid-state drive, oftentimes you are cloning to a smaller solid-state hard drive. And this was the case with these computers too. I was cloning it from a 1 terabyte spinning disk to a 500 gig solid-state, but this was totally fine as they had only used less than 100 gigabytes of space on their spinning disk. However, most free cloning software such as CloneZilla really balk at the idea of transferring working partitions from a bigger drive to a smaller drive. So let me explain the workaround on how you do this with GParted, which is a free Linux-based partitioning utility. Before doing anything with partitions on the source drive, you need to make sure, number one, that you've backed up all important customer data in case something goes wrong. And number two, you're going to have to do a checkdisk/R, which can take a long time, but chances are on that spinning disk errors have accumulated that GParted will choke hard on if they are not resolved. Schedule a checkdisk/R at the command prompt to be run, or you can run it from the USB, but either way, you need to do that check disk before proceeding. So you can launch the UEFI version of GParted and you can go into the partition editor. Once you are in GParted, there's a couple things that you need to do to the source drive. So if you're cloning from a 1 terabyte to a 500 gig solid state, what you'll need to do is analyze the partition structure. And usually there are several small partitions at the front of the drive, such as the EFI partition, such as the Microsoft Reserved, could be some other diagnostic partitions, and sometimes there's partitions at the end of the drive. Well, you will not be able to just clone from one drive to another unless those partitions are resized to fit into the new solid-state drive. So there's two ways that you do this. First of all, you take the C drive or the boot disk, and assuming that you've run check disk and there are no errors, you can shrink the partition. So in this case, you're going to be shrinking it from about 930 gigabytes on a 1 terabyte drive to something about 416 or 415 gigabytes. So you're going to use the resize move option, and you're going to drag the end of that to the left so that the partition takes up only about 416 gigabytes of space. And then any partitions that are at the end of the drive, you're going to have to move those to the end of the drive to the right of the partition that you just resized. So you're basically making a bunch of free unallocated space at the end of the drive. So once you've resized your boot partition to about 416 gigabytes, you've moved your ending partitions to the left. There's nothing but unallocated space at the end of the drive. Then you can apply the changes, and GParted will go through the process of shrinking that partition and moving those partitions so that you can actually copy and paste the partitions from the source drive to the destination drive. Once that process is completed, then what you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste the partitions from the left to the right in order from the source drive to the destination drive. So you're going to grab the first partition, which is probably the reserved or the EFI partition, copy it, switch to the destination disk, and then make sure that the partition table is set as GPT. That's mostly what you're going to do if it's a UEFI setup. And then paste that first partition, then go back to your source drive, grab the second partition, which is usually like a Microsoft Reserve, copy that, switch to the destination disk, paste that, switch back to the source disk, right click and copy the boot drive, the C drive, and then go and switch it again, paste that, and then the diagnostic partitions or any other partition at the end of the drive. So you're going to copy probably 5 or 6 partitions in order so that the destination solid state disk matches the original disk. Once you have copied and pasted all of the partitions, you're going to click apply, and GParted will copy or clone the entire drive from the source to the destination, copying every single partition in order so that it matches on the destination drive. This process will probably take a little bit of time, especially if it's an older drive. It could take maybe 2, maybe 3 hours, depending on how much it's transferring. But when it's done, you'll have on the solid state hard drive a matching partition structure to what you had resized on the source drive, and it will fit because you've shrunk those partitions and moved the ones at the end to the left. I'm just cutting in here on the editing side because I realized I forgot to say something in the video that's very important. Once you have copied and applied the changes and you have a matching partition structure, you must then make sure that the flags on the destination drive exactly match the flags on the source drive. So what you'll need to do is check the flags on each partition, such as auto mount, hidden, diagnostic, and apply those exact same flags to the destination drive's partitions. However, you're not done yet. The solid-state hard drive will blue screen and will fail to boot. And what you'll need to do is boot into the Windows 11 installer off of the USB. So after GParted is done copying, shut the computer down and set the BIOS to boot onto the USB for your Windows 11 installer. You will need to do this because if you attempt to boot off of the solid state drive, you will get a blue screen, and the blue screen is because you've copied the EFI partition, but the firmware on that new drive does not know where the Windows installation is. It just knows that it's been copied from the old drive. So once you're in the command prompt on the Windows environment on the thumb drive for the installer, what you're going to do is launch GParted, list disk, list volume, check to make sure all of those partitions are successfully copied over. And then what you're going to do is you're going to run a BCDBoot command that will fix the EFI files on the EFI partition. So you're going to select the EFI partition and assign it a drive letter, such as S:. Then you're going to use the BCDBoot command from the boot drive, the Windows directory, to copy the EFI backup to the mounted EFI partition, overwriting the old EFI boot structure. That is what will allow the solid state drive to boot. Once you've done that, then you'll be able to boot off of the newly copied solid state drive and you'll have a working installation of Windows. But you're not done yet, because most likely there's still a little bit of space at the end of that solid state drive and you want to make sure that it's using all of the space. But first, launch Windows, make sure that you don't have any blue screens that are happening. Make sure it launches fully into the user's environment and everything looks good and everything's running faster. Then do a full shutdown, boot back into GParted, and then you can use the resize move feature to move any diagnostic partitions all the way to the right to the end where they were on the original drive, and you can grow the boot drive to fill the rest of the unallocated space. Make those changes, and then you have a solid state that is fully provisioned. The C drive is using all of the available space on that solid state hard disk. If you get stuck, there are ways that you can get help, and honestly, using AI is a good move here. ChatGPT is well versed and well trained on all of these procedures, using GParted, using BCDBoot, EFI partitions, and so you can use that as a resource to help you. I've been able to use it to figure out how to do this before, and now I've got it pretty much down into a workflow. It used to be much harder to resurrect Windows 10, Windows 11 from blue screens, but a lot of times a corrupted install in your EFI partition is what's preventing you from booting off of a newly copied or a corrupted Windows installation. So I hope that little bit of technical explanation helped you, and if I can help you in the local Greenville, South Carolina area with your computers, whether they're upgrading Windows 11 or if you're having a crashed blue screening Windows installation that you need help resurrecting, please give me a call at 864-475-1895 and I would be happy to help you.